Welcome to the grand finale of our super cool RAG demo series. We have built an incredible backend with n8n and Qdrant, and now we are topping it off with a Streamlit frontend and going live with Ngrok, and all without backend coding. Using n8n's visual nodes and Streamlit simplicity, we will connect everything, upload documents, query our system, and share it online. It's the ultimate no-code payoff. Let's finish this with a bang. So this is the setup that we are trying to create. So currently we have our n8n. So this is our n8n that is running. Now inside this n8n we have multiple workflows. So we have one workflow to add the RAG, and then another one to retrieve it. So we have multiple methods of retrieving the RAG which we saw in the previous video. Now this is the current setup that we have. But one issue with this setup is that we have been accessing this RAG application via n8n. We were using the chat trigger option of n8n. But that is not scalable. That is not something that you will be able to use so that your end user will be able to access that particular RAG. So in this video, we are going to see how we can make it much more accessible. How to access these items outside n8n. Okay, so the backend will still be n8n, but we are providing access to the outside world to our n8n setup. In order to do this, we will be creating one service. That service will be the Ngrok service. So using this Ngrok service, we will be exposing this n8n. So this Ngrok will be connected to our n8n so that any communication coming to this Ngrok will be served by our n8n. We will also be having a front-end setup. So this is our front-end setup where we will be creating a Streamlit front-end application, and via this front-end application, with the help of this Ngrok service, we will be accessing the different workflows. So we will be able to ensure that via our Streamlit application, we will be able to upload the document to our vector database, and also to retrieve the data from the vector database using Streamlit. So this is the setup that we are going to see today. The link to the code you will be seeing in the description below. So this is the code that I am using during the demo. Once you clone your repository, you will be seeing a directory like this, and here I want you to cd into the n8n-rag folder, and inside that there will be a v3 folder. So this is the folder that we will be using for today's demo. Now if I check the contents of this particular directory, you can see we have the docker compose.yml file. So this will contain all the services that we are setting up during this particular demo. And you will also see one .env.example file. So in order to provide environment variables for our docker compose YAML file, we are going to make use of this .env file. So this .env.example is a sample env file with the variable specified. So you will be able to create an env file from this one. And we also have a Streamlit folder. So this Streamlit folder contains our app.py. This is going to be our Streamlit front-end application. So pretty simple directory structure we got. Now let's look at our code, which is our docker compose YAML file. So this is our directory structure. So let's go to n8n rag and go to the v3 folder. And here let's look at our docker compose.yml file. So this docker compose.yml file is similar to our initial docker compose file, but with some extra option. I'll go through this docker compose in detail. So let's start. So first we have this volume section. So in our previous version, this is the volume that we have used. And remember, this volume we will be using for data persistence. So we don't want to create n8n fresh each and every time you run this demo. So that is why we are using Docker volume. And when you create a Docker volume, it will be creating by prefixing the folder name to the volume name. So the initial volume that we created from this v1 folder. So our volume name starts with v1 underscore. So since we want to use that particular volume that we used previously, and since we don't want to execute these commands from the v1 folder, I am using a workaround. So this is how I am telling Docker Compose that I want to access the volume with these names, which is v1 underscore n8n demo storage and v1 underscore Qdrant demo storage, so that I'll be able to access them using these names directly. Okay, so another alternate option to this will be to create a project or give a name for your Docker Compose. So since I didn't give the name or the project name when I created this v1 application, I won't be able to use it. So that is why I am using this workaround. Next we have the network. So we have a single network that we will be using. Now we have our placeholder. So this is the placeholder. So I explained about this in the previous video. So if you haven't already, please watch that video so that you will be able to get a clearer idea of what this placeholder is all about. And in this section there are two things that we changed. So we added two extra environment variables. One is webhook URL and another one is ngrok static URL. So these are the two things that we configured for this particular version of our project. Now these items will be there. You have to configure this within our .env file. So let me just show you our env file. So here there are multiple items that I am adding. So here you will be able to see n8n encryption key and n8n user management JWT secret. So these things you can give your own secret, your own key for that. Then comes the ngrok auth token. So this I'll show you where you can get this auth token from within ngrok. So that ngrok auth token you have to add it in here. Then we have the ngrok static URL. This also I'll show you from where you will be able to get. And finally we have this webhook URL. So here we are just adding https:// to this ngrok static URL. So where we'll be using this we'll see. Now let's go back to our docker compose.yml file. So this is where the environment variables will be configured. You can see the environment variables that we have specified. We are referring to those in here. Now let's look at the services. Here no change in the n8n auto service configuration. It is same as the one that we created last time. No difference. So same volume etc. so that we'll be able to use the persisted data. So here we are creating the ngrok service. So this is a service that we have not used for the previous version. So ngrok is a tool that creates secure tunnels to your local server, allowing you to expose it to the internet with a public URL. So it's commonly used for testing webhooks, sharing local development environments, or bypassing firewall restrictions. So this is a way using which you will be able to test your application, test your webhooks. So in this one we are setting up this ngrok service using the default ngrok image. We are specifying the container name also as ngrok. Then we are ensuring that this container is created within our custom network, and we want to ensure that it restarts, so it doesn't go down, because if it is providing a public URL, we want to ensure that it is always running. And here we are providing the environment variable. So here we are providing the ngrok auth token. So this is the token that it will use to authenticate, and this auth token we are configuring within our .env file. Here we are specifying the command for this particular container. So this command is the one that will create a tunnel between the ngrok service and our n8n service. So here this is the command http, and see this n8n-auto and the port number, which is 5678. So this is how ngrok is connected to our n8n service that we are creating. And here if you want to link a custom domain, you will be able to use this option, which is --domain. And here it is getting the custom domain URL from our .env configuration. Now we have the port section. So this is the port that you can use if you want to access the ngrok web interface. It is not mandatory that you should do this, but if you want to access the web interface of ngrok, then you can use this. And it also depends on the n8n auto, which is our n8n service. So that is our ngrok service. Now we have our Qdrant service. So this Qdrant service also is exactly the same as that of our initial version. So in the initial video I am explaining about this particular service, so please make sure to watch that video if you are not sure about this particular service. And finally we have our Streamlit Frontend service. So this is a new service that we are adding for this particular version of our demo, and here it is a Python application that we are creating with hostname and container name as Streamlit, and we are creating it within the same network as that of our other containers, and we are also ensuring that this particular service is always running, and this is the port mapping associated with that particular container. Next we are setting up the working directory for our container as /epp, and here we are mapping the current directory Streamlit folder to the working directory, which is the /app location. So this Streamlit folder where we have our app.py, so this Streamlit folder will be mounted as a volume inside your container so that it will have access to the Python application. Now this service also depends on the n8n auto service, which is our n8n service, and here we are configuring the environment variable for the Streamlit application to use. So we are specifying the n8n base URL, which will be specific to the n8n service name. So you can use either this, or you will also be able to use the ngrok static URL option, but this is enough since it is within the same network. And finally we have the default executable for our Streamlit application. So this is the command. So it will ensure that Python Streamlit is installed and it will run this Streamlit application when the container starts, and it will ensure that the app.py is served via port 8501, and you will be able to access them using your server address, which is localhost. So this is our docker compose.yml file where we are creating 4 services. One is our n8n service, another one is the ngrok service, then we have the Qdrant service, and finally the Streamlit service. So these are the services that we will be creating. Now let's look at our Streamlit application. So if you go to the Streamlit folder, you will see the app.py file. So this is our Streamlit application. So let me just briefly explain the Streamlit application. So here, as always, we are importing our Python libraries for Streamlit to work, and here we are setting up some variables in order to use as part of our Python script, and here you can see we are configuring the n8n base URL. So this is a URL using which our Streamlit application will be able to access our n8n that is running behind the scenes. So we can either use the URL based on the n8n service name, or if you are using ngrok, we will be able to use the one with the ngrok static URL. Then comes the workflows that we will be using. So these workflow IDs we will have to update. So here, so this first variable contains the workflow ID which corresponds to the workflow in n8n, using which we will be able to create a new collection. So we can upload a file and n8n will create a new collection within the Qdrant vector store using this workflow. Then we have the query workflow ID. So this variable contains the workflow ID for the workflow using which we will be able to query the collection, query the Qdrant vector store from our Streamlit application. Then we have the n8n path. So this will determine whether we are testing an n8n test URL or n8n live webhook. So if it is test, then the path will have webhook-test, and if it is live, then it will have the path as webhook. So remember, if you are using ngrok static URL, you will be able to make use of this live path. But if you are not using the static URL, and if you are using the n8n base URL as the service name or localhost, you have to ensure to use this test path. Now let's look at the functions. So we have two functions. One is to upload the file to the Qdrant vector store. So here this is the function which will be triggered from Streamlit, and when this particular function is triggered, it will be providing the file as binary data. It will also provide the file name and the collection name. So these are the inputs that will be provided to this particular function, and here it is generating the n8n workflow URL. So based on the n8n base URL, n8n path and the import workflow ID, we are recreating the URL. So which workflow to execute we are configuring using this particular URL. Then we are specifying the MIME tape and the file name, so that based on the file that you are uploading, n8n workflow will able to access the file and process it accordingly. And here you will be able to see the file and the data that we are uploading. So we are adding files which will contain the file binary data and also the file MIME tape and the file name. Then under the data we are also adding the collection. So this will contain the collection name. So the collection name that you want to create with the newly updated data. Okay. So now this is where the actual posting or calling of that n8n workflow URL will happen, the webhook URL. So it will call with this information and we will be getting the response, and this response we will be able to use. Okay. So here we also are doing exception handling. So if there is any error when it comes to communicating with the workflow, then we will be getting an error. So this is our upload to Qdrant function. Now let's look at the query Qdrant function. So this is the second function which can be used to query our Qdrant database. So in here these are the parameters that we are passing. So one is the query, so the actual query from the user. Then another one is the collection name, so which collection within Qdrant vector store that you want to query, and we'll be able to also specify the number of outputs that you want to generate, the limitation, the number of output limit you will be able to specify. And here also we are generating the webhook URL for the query workflow, and here the only difference is this particular section where we are using the query workflow ID instead of our import workflow ID, and we are passing the parameters where we are adding the query collection, which is the collection name, and also the limit. And here is where the query is actually called, and the response will be available in here. So these are the functionalities. So now we will be seeing how the Streamlit UI is set up and where those functions are getting called. So here we are just setting the title for our Streamlit application. Then we are adding 2 tabs. So multi-tab layout we are adding. So one tab is for document upload and another tab is to query the vector store. Now this is the tab that is corresponding to the upload operation. So here you will be able to see an option where we will be able to specify the collection name. The default name I added as our collection name, so you can use a different collection name. Then this will contain the file uploader where you will be able to choose a file from your local machine to upload. So these are the supported file formats, and there will also be an upload button using which you will be able to submit. So when the submit button is clicked and if there is a file that are ready to upload, then you will be able to see here, see this. This is where our upload to Qdrant function is called. And here we are passing the parameters. So we are specifying the collection. So we are passing the collection in here. Then we are specifying the uploaded file. So see this one, this is the binary data. And then we are also getting the file name from that uploaded file and getting that particular file. And here we are processing the response whether the file upload is successful or whether it failed. So this is our upload option, upload configuration. So in the Streamlit frontend we will have 2 tabs. One will be upload, another one is query, and this is the functionality of our upload tab. Now we have the query tab. So the query tab will be able to process the user query. So here you can see there is an option where user will be able to specify the collection name. User will also be able to enter the query that they want to use, and then you have the submit button. So here you will see the submit button with the text as search. This will query the vector store. And see, this is where our query underscore Qdrant function is getting called. So this is the function that is getting called, and here we are passing the query text, collection name, and the limit when it comes to query. Now this is where the query data will be processed. So we are processing the query data, and if the correct data is available, we are just getting the relevant content to be displayed as response from the retriever. So here if there are multiple responses, it will be processed in here, and if there is a single dictionary response, it will be processed in here. And we also have proper error handling configured within this, so that the front-end user will have proper notifications based on the response received. So this is our Streamlit application. Finally, we have this notes.txt. So here this will contain the commands that you can use in order to build this application and to access the different components. So like I mentioned, first we need our local n8n online. So enter ngrok. So from the ngrok website you have to grab your auth token and you have to add it to the .env file. So let me just show you how you can access the ngrok website and from where you will be able to get the auth token and also the domain URL. So let me just go to my browser. In order to access ngrok, you can go for ngrok.com. So you can browse ngrok.com. You can log in to your ngrok account. And if you don't have an ngrok account, just go ahead and sign up. You will be able to sign up for free. Okay, and once you sign up, you will be taken to a welcome page like this with setup instruction like this, where you will be able to see the different setup operations that are allowed with ngrok. And here, in order to get your auth token, you have to go to this section, which is your auth token. So if you click on that, on the top section you will see your auth token. So you can just copy this particular auth token and add it to your .env file. So this is where you will be able to get your Ngrok auth token from. Now the next thing will be to get a static URL. So by default, when you create a free account with Ngrok, you will get access to one custom domain. So you will be able to have access to a single custom domain. So for that, you will be able to go to this domain section. So just click on the domain section, and there it will allow you to create one custom domain. So as you can see, I already created my custom domain. So this is the domain URL that is available for me, and this is the domain that I have configured within my .env file. Now that you know where to get your Ngrok auth key and the custom domain URL, let's build this application. So in order to build the application, let's go to our terminal. Make sure that you are in the n8n rag v3 folder. Here we will execute the docker compose up-d command. And here remember, make sure that your docker compose YAML file and .env is in the same location, so that our docker compose will have access to those env data. So let me just build this. So in my case it went fast, but in your case, if you are running it for the first time, it may take some time for the images to be downloaded, but in my case it went really fast. Now our setup is complete. So it is live. No code, just config. Now remember, Streamlit is a Python library for quick web applications. So our app is now ready. Our front-end application is now ready. Now let's verify whether our services are running. So let's execute the docker compose ps command. As you can see, it is running. Now let's access our services. Let's access our n8n service first. We can access the n8n service using localhost :5678. So it will give access to the n8n, or we can also use the custom domain that we configured it to work with Ngrok, and that URL also we can try. So let me just try that. And when you access this for the first time, it will ask for the confirmation. So it is just confirming that this is a free server that is served using ngrok.com. So if you are okay with it, then click on visit site, and it will take you to your n8n server. So you can either access your n8n using localhost URL or now using the custom URL. Since I want to show you with the public URL, I am going to use my custom domain URL. So I'll click on sign in and Ola. So we have the previous n8n that we had set up during our previous two demos, and that is currently accessible through our custom domain URL. Now let's try to access our Ngrok dashboard. So I'll use localhost :4040. So this is our Ngrok dashboard. Here if you click on the status section, you will be able to see the status, and here you will be able to see what is the URL and also the serving address. So now this particular URL is serving the content from this particular n8n service. Now let's access our Streamlit front-end application. So in order to access the Streamlit front-end application, you will have to browse localhost :8501. Okay, so here we are getting this error. So that means we haven't configured the Ngrok static URL as an environment to our Streamlit service. So let's fix this. So I'll go to my docker compose.yaml file, and let's go to the Streamlit section. Yes, so here I didn't add that, so I'm going to add this particular configuration. In order to fix that issue, so I had to add this section in my app.py, and here what it will do is it will load the environment variable directly from the .env file. So this is the variable from the .env file that it will load, and if it is not there, then it will use the default value as this one. Okay, and in order for it to work, I had to import one module called .env. So there is one small change in docker compose.yml file. So here in the pip install section, I added the .env section as well. Now let's try to access our front-end application. So we'll use localhost :8501. Yes. So now my front-end application also is working. Now let's also access the Qdrant dashboard. So we'll use localhost :6333, which will provide us with the Qdrant. So I'll just browse dashboard. So as you can see, wonders of the world, one collection is still available within our Qdrant dashboard. So now let's refresh our Ngrok custom URL. As you can see, it is working. Now that we have our Streamlit frontend and our n8n server running, accessible using the Ngrok URL, next what we have to do is we have to convert our existing workflows to work with a frontend. Currently, all our workflows that we created were using chat trigger as the input. But in order for it to work with a front-end application, we need to configure webhook for those. So that is the first thing that we are going to do. So first let's see how we'll be able to convert our add rag workflow with webhook. So this add rag we want to first convert into webhook, so that from the front end it should be able to be triggered. So let's do that. So what I'll do is I'll clone this particular workflow. So I'll click on these three dots and click duplicate. So I'm going to give the name as add rag hyphen say webhook, so that I know that this is the one that I'll be using. So I'll click duplicate. So it will open that workflow. Okay, so let's save this. Okay, now we want to change the trigger from chat message received to webhook. So we need to add the webhook trigger. So in order to do that, what we will do is we will delete this one and we will add the first step, which is a webhook. So we will use this particular option. This is going to be the trigger. So let me just select that, and here you can see both test URL and production URLs are available. And like I mentioned, the difference is when it comes to the test URL, the URL will contain the path webhook-test, but when it comes to the production URL, it will contain the path webhook. And this is going to be the workflow ID which we will be using. But first let's configure this one. So we want this to use the post method. So let's select post, and here no authentication required. Now here in the response option, instead of immediately, we'll use the last option, which is using respond to webhook node. So we'll add the node, and here in the option we have to specify the binary data, because we want to upload the binary data from our Streamlit frontend. So here we will specify the field name as file, because this is the field name that we are using within our app.py. See here we are uploading with the field name as file. So that is the name that we have to specify in there. Okay, so let's first connect this to our Qdrant vector store using which we are adding. So let's drag this to this one. So now our webhook is connected. So let me just save this. Now the next thing will be to add a respond to webhook node as the response to this workflow with webhook trigger. So in order to do that, I'll just use respond to webhook. So this is the one that we will have to use as the response or the final node. So let me just do that, respond to webhook. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify respond with JSON, because we want the output to be in a particular format. So I'll use expression instead of fixed, and here I am going to replace it with this one. So here I am specifying my own custom JSON, so success, and then message I'll add file uploaded successfully, and collection I am specifying this collection as the input from the webhook node. So this is the webhook node, and there inside the body there will be one collection data. So this is the field, so that field I'll be accessing to get the collection name. So this is the change that needs to be done in order for our front end to be able to trigger this particular n8n workflow. So let me just save this. So now I can either test the URL or I can use production URL. So let me just copy this particular workflow ID. So what I'll do is I'll go to my app.py, and here in the import workflow ID, so I'll replace this test with the actual import workflow ID. So let me just save this. So now in my workflow I need to make it active. So here remember I am using the live URL. So if you want to use the live URL, make sure that it is active, and you can confirm this. So just click on got it, and now this is active. Okay, so now if you go to the execution, there are no executions yet. So let's try one execution. So let me just go to my Streamlit. So I am going to upload one document. So here what I'll do is I'll add one new collection, so 1 days of world new, but I'll upload the same file that I used last time. Let me just click upload. Currently it is processing. See this one, now I am getting the response, file successfully uploaded to Qdrant, and see the response format. It is giving the success, then message, and finally the collection name. So now it's successfully uploaded to the Qdrant vector store. Now let me just go to this workflow and go to the execution section, and here see this, you will see this execution. So this is the execution that got triggered, which successfully completed. Now if I go to the Qdrant collection section and refresh, you will be able to see that here new collection is not created. So why is that? That is because there is one more configuration we need to change. So if you look at this Qdrant vector store, here you can see this Qdrant collection by ID, and there you can see the ID is still the default one. So that is why it is just adding it to this particular existing collection, but that is not what we want. So we want it to add a new collection. So in order to do that, let me just go to my webhook. So I'll click listen for test event. So here remember it is test event, so we need to make use of the test URL. So let me just go to my app.py, and here let me just confirm that it is a test URL. So it is a test URL. So I will change the path to webhook-test, and here I will refresh this. Now I will upload. So I am going to upload with _new as the collection name. So I'll click on upload, and here you can see this one, it received the data, it received the file. So now let me just go to this Qdrant vector store node. Here I'll go to this input schema, and here you will see that in the input there will be one, see this one, collection, body collection. So this is the collection that we want to use here instead of this hard-coded value. So let me just change that. So what I can do is I can just drag and drop this from here. So now see this, it will get that particular value. Okay, so now this is ready. Now let me just go to my app.py. Here let me just make the URL live. So I'll use the live URL. Now if I go to my Streamlit application and refresh, let me just add the collection name as _new. I'll browse and add the file. Now let me just click upload. See, now it is successfully uploaded. So now let me just go to Qdrant and refresh and see this. I have one new collection added to our Qdrant, and this collection was added with the help of this execution. See, this is the execution that added the collection. So now from the front end, we'll be able to trigger the n8n workflow, which will in turn perform the creation of a new collection with whichever data that we are uploading. Now that we have successfully integrated the first part, which is to add to our RAG database, next let's integrate the second part, which is querying the vector store. So in order to query the vector store, let's go to the workflow. Here we can use any of the methods that we used when it comes to querying. So let me just use the simplest one. So this RAG query is the one where we used this question and answer chain to query the vector store. So let me just go and duplicate this particular workflow, and here I am going to add webhook to it so that I know this is for my webhook example. Now here, like in the last workflow, let's remove this trigger, which is the chat message trigger, and instead we'll add one custom step, which is webhook. So adding the webhook, we'll add it as the trigger. Here for the second application, which is the query Qdrant function, we are using the get protocol. So here in this we'll just keep the HTTP method as get, and here instead of respond immediately, we'll select use respond to webhook node. So no need to add any properties in here, and we'll just save this. And before that, let me just copy this particular workflow ID. So let me just add it to my app.py. So here query workflow ID, you can replace it with your actual query workflow ID. Okay, so now this is the webhook trigger that we added. Let me just connect it to this question and answer chain node. So that first part is done. Next, we need to end with a respond to webhook node. So let's add that, and here we can keep it as it is. We want it to respond with the first incoming item, which will be the response from our vector data store. Okay, so I'll save this one. Now I'll make this active, and here also we want to be able to specify the collection that we want to query. So let's do that, but for that to work, we need to get the event so that we'll be able to link it to our other nodes. So in order to do that, we need to first test this one. So I'll click on listen for test events. So in my app.py, I need to use the test URL, and let me just go to the browser and refresh. So here I want to query the 1 days of world new collection, and here I'll enter a query. So where is Stonehenge? Okay, and here I'll be able to click on search. Now let's go to this particular node. Here we got the first query. Now in this question and answer chain, there is an update that we need to do. So instead of connected chat trigger node, we have to select define below, and here we have to specify the user query. So this is going to be the user query. Now the actual query will be used when it comes to execution. So now I'll just test the step. So it will query the collection with that particular query. Now it is executing and I am getting the response, but here I have to make one more change. Instead of this particular collection name, I want it to use the collection that I specify. I need it to use the ID that I pass. So here I want to select the webhook node. So in order to do that, let's go to mapping, and here you will be able to see all the previous nodes. So I'll hide this one, and this webhook is the one I need. And in webhook I'll see one collection. So this collection will contain the collection ID. So this is the collection that I want it to query. So now everything is ready. Let me just save this one. Now let me just update the URL to the live URL. Now let's refresh this. Here I'll go to the query vector store. I am going to give the collection name as 1 days of old new, and here I'll ask where is Stonehenge. I'll click search. Now see this one. It queried the database successfully, and here I am getting the response. See, Stonehenge is located in Amesbury, United Kingdom, and this is the response that it received from that particular workflow execution. Okay, so now if I go to this workflow, if I go to the executions, you see this is the current execution that was successful, which gave this particular response that we are seeing here. So whichever collection that we want to query, we can just specify the collection name in here and it will query that particular collection. So it is dynamic also. So what we did is created a super cool front-end application which will interact and trigger the n8n workflow to perform the operations. So you don't have to create or write a backend code in order to perform the backend operations. Just use n8n drag and drop options to do that. And from the front end, we are triggering that n8n workflows to perform different operations and to integrate successfully. So Streamlit, Ngrok, n8n and Qdrant. So we have a combination of all these services working together to make our application work, and that also without needing any backend code. So that's it. We have created a super cool RAG demo from scratch, all without backend code. What a ride! If you loved this series, smash that like button, subscribe for more no code AI fun, and drop a comment. What will you build next with this one? See you in the next adventure. Bye bye. Thank you.